header file. So I'll go into here, net worth, into components, and then header. So every single page that I make has a header. I just like to have that. If we go, whoops, I'll pull here. If I go into dashboard and then open up the lifetime income streams. So up here, this is the header. I just kind of organize the data like that. Or if I go into the savings section, similarly, it also has a header. It doesn't have a title, which I should fix and put that in. But so we need to have this sort of header that explains what it is and then shows a few key details. So what the header is doing is it's first explaining where we are. We're in the net worth section. Then it's providing a little bit of information. So you can see that your net worth here is $110,000. And then you've got your assets and your liabilities and then the value of each. It also gives you a little bit of control that you can flip back and forth. So in order to do that, we've got our importing React, we've got our styled components. I'm importing the selector button vertical. So this is this button right here, which is in UI. Oh, it looks like it's frozen. There we go. Oh, maybe the button itself. So the button isn't linked to switch back and forth. It's just clicking these. So that's a bit of an issue that I'll have to fix. So I've imported that. Then I'm importing selectors. And so what selectors are, I've talked about them a little bit before, but if I go into Redux, and so we've got our state, which is stored in the reducer. So this is where we've got all of the state. Then in the selectors, we've got some pretty crazy formulas here. And if it's too much for you guys to be working with this and learning this as well, then I can work on the selectors. But basically what I do is, let's say I've got the total assets selector. So this is just an example of one. I take the entire reducer, so that's all of the state, and then it's basically a formula that's taking the values of all the assets, seeing if they're above zero, otherwise it throws an error, and then summing them all up. So I'm using the reduce function to sum them all up, and then I'm dividing it by 1,000 so that we've just got a nice round number. I'm also rounding it. So suddenly over here in the header, by importing my total assets selector, I pull it in here from map state to props, and then it's connected in, passed in through the top of the function, which is up here. So I've got total asset selector. So just to walk through again, it's getting pulled in from the selectors page. Then it's being passed in through the map state to props function, which is using fancy magic math to connect it in, throwing into the header file. The header is then using destructuring over here, calling it total asset selector, to pull it in, called the total asset selector. And then suddenly I have access to the total value. So if I go here, if I change the value of the TFSA, you can see that this is recalculating and giving me that total value. So that's what that is doing there. Similarly, I've got the total liabilities selector, which is here. Whoops. Ooh, I wonder what happened. That's an error I should figure out. Let's see if I can redo that. So the total liability selector, it's doing the same thing. So if I go into a liability and I increase it, then it too is changing. So that's just what the selectors are doing. Then, so usually when I start, I just hard code in some numbers. When I'm building the header, I'll just like hard code in 57K and so on. And so if you guys don't want to learn selectors, that's okay. You can just hard code it in initially. So we've got and then I also just renamed them total assets and total liabilities. And then net worth is just your total assets minus your total liabilities. So by having these two values, I'm calculating within this header component, I'm calculating the net worth. So for the spending section, you'll want to have something similar where you're pulling in the data, and you might have like total variable spending and total fixed spending. Then here you might want to have your estimated total monthly spending, and you could have it maybe between two values because we're going to have a range of values. So you would pull that in from the selectors, which are getting that from the data, and then render that up here. So that's what's going on there. Then we've got most of the logic contained here has to do with switching back between the categories. So I had to do some like wrapping different divs and divs so that I could use display flex to have this nice little box here. Oh, it's just re-rendering because I moved it a little bit. So I've just got my category selection. So you might want to do something kind of similar. If you, yeah, I'm not really sure for you guys if we should have it toggle between fixed and variable, because the trouble is with what you guys are building is, say you would have housing expenses, but housing is going to have both fixed and variable. So I don't know if you would have the same. Maybe you could. Ooh, I don't know. Sorry, I won't. We'll see if it just adds, if there's too much different spending accounts along here, and then if so, maybe we could just show the fixed expenses or the variable expenses, and then that could toggle back and forth. But we'll have to think about how we would want to display it, because we don't have enough to show all 5 categories at a time, but we don't have a nice reason to switch back and forth between the two. It's not like assets or liabilities. So we'll have to talk about that. So basically everything that's happening here, we've got our selector button that's vertical. The display that I'm passing in is either assets or liabilities. So if we go back into the net worth page, I have this state, which is display, and which is the current state. Then we can set the display, which will change it, and the current state is assets. So when it starts, it's assets. Then if I go back into the header, so it has pulled in. So we've pulled in this display and set display right up here. So down here, if the display is assets, then the selector button will be up like this. And then if it's not, it'll be down. So that's kind of what's going on there. And then the selector button vertical. So something's wrong with my on click here. So maybe I have to set display liabilities. Let's see what that does, if that makes it clickable. But so then it just works once, and then I have to go assets, then I can go back. So there's some issues with that button that I'll have to fix. So then back to this, we've got our category, then the assets. So clicking assets sets the display as assets. Clicking liabilities sets the display as liabilities. So that's how we're able to toggle back and forth here. So we just set display as assets, now it's liabilities. So further on in the control panel, it's looking to see, is it assets or is it liabilities, and then deciding what to render based on that. So that's what we're using here to toggle back and forth. And then with these, I'm doing a little bit of logic in the display, so that if the liabilities is more than $1 million, then it's going to show an M. So it's going to do total liabilities divided by 1 million. So it just show like 1 million. Maybe we could get an example of that if I go super high. So you can see here how it clicked into 1.016 million. So that I should probably trim it down, but I think it looks nicer to be like 1 million. So right here's the logic to switch between the million and the 1,000 mark, which is the K. And that's basically it. That's the header section. So you can see here in the styled components that we've got the grid area is A, and then nothing too crazy in here. Most of this is just flex boxing to have this be vertical, then these be on top of each other, but then also be separated here. So I've kind of got divs and divs with different flex categories, column then row, so that it lines nicely. But yeah, that's the header section.